So Jacqueline Novogratz figured out very early on in life that the dream of money and power and position, that dream that really drove Joseph, was not the life-giving dream. That was not the dream that brought a person to a sense of joy and delight, but it was the second dream really that informed Joseph, that dream where people had enough to eat, where there was enough to go around. That was really the dream that was life-giving. Jacqueline Novogratz, she started off early on in investment banking, investment finance in Central America. She was working as a very young woman in Brazil. She was doing loans, kind of working on business deals for those at the very tip top. And then when she had time off, she was hanging out in the favelas and the slums, and because that was where the color and the life was. And she was able to see that her life's work was not touching any of the 2 billion poor who really needed, a different life. And so after 3 years in that, she decided to leave it, and she went to work throughout Africa. She worked with the World Bank, she worked with UNICEF, and then at just 25, she co-founded the very first kind of microfinance institution in Rwanda, working to give loans to people, very small loans that were really life-changing. So then in 2001, she started this organization called Acumen. And what they do is they invest in social good. They figure out a way to take capital and to bring it together with social entrepreneurs, with kind of the most visionary idealists who are trying to truly make the world a different place for the 2 billion of the world's poor. How can they get irrigation, sanitation, education, energy? And now at this point, they have 80 projects from India, East Africa, Pakistan, the United States, providing toilets, providing schools, all kinds of remarkable stuff. And she realized, and impacting like 260 million poor people, she realized early on that the traditional models we use, aid and charity alone or the free market capital alone, neither of these problems could solve what was going on, that you had to create some kind of hybrid, that you had to find a way where you weren't screaming at one another and take the very best of the economic systems we have and create something new. She, has worked through all the years trying to figure out how you get investors to be good about long-term patient capital, where, they can deal with a smaller return on the investment, a longer term, knowing that they're making really amazing social impact. And how do you do this across economies of scale? And you're looking at infrastructure issues. It's really complicated to try to, as she says, move the needle. But one of the things she's written about most is how a lot of the work that's about transformation is what she calls, the soft skills, what we call the soft skills. It's love, right? It's caring about people. It's something we talk about a lot here, accompaniment. It's walking with other people. It's not, we're the Americans, we know everything, let's swoop in, let me tell you how to do it. It's give and take, right? It's being a follower and a guide. It's walking along together. And one of the things that kind of undergirds all of that, something she talks about over and over, is listening to people, not just with your ears, but especially someone further, especially your teenager, your kid, your parent, someone from the untouchable caste in India who's not used to speaking up, listening with your eyes and listening with your heart and your mind to kind of understand the history and the context of a person, to really kind of lean in to who they are, to listen with your whole body so that you can hear and you could be changed. And that's what we have in the lesson today. It's this long story. It goes back and forth. Joseph isn't sure he can trust his brother. His brothers are trying to convince him, and it goes on and on and on until finally, then Judah drew near. The rabbis love that phrase. Then Judah drew near. Then Judah stepped up. Then Judah drew to who? It's not clear who he drew near to. Is it to his father Jacob? Now he's a father. He's lost 2 sons. Remember, that was last week with Tamar. He lost the 2 of his 3 sons, Aaron, Onan. Now he can identify with his father. The word father will be in the next speech he makes 14 times. Maybe now he can empathize with what it means to lose a child. Or maybe Judah was drawing near to his own brothers. Maybe he could see what he had done to Joseph and now couldn't imagine doing that to Benjamin. He could kind of see them. But the rabbi said, no, really, before he drew near to his father or his brothers, he drew near to Judah. He drew near to himself. He saw himself. He saw the role he played, the place he'd been in the family. He revealed himself. He wasn't afraid to see. And then Joseph responds by saying, come closer to me. You know, Judah draws and Joseph steps up. And these two men, grown men, kind of emerge and grow together, risking vulnerable open. In 2004, Sam Goldman was a Peace Corps volunteer in Benin, Africa. His neighbor had an accident with kerosene and it burned his house down and severely burned his eldest son. At the time, kerosene was the most widely used energy source for the world's poor, 2 billion people. Even though it's expensive, it's dangerous, it's really expensive. It's like 40 cents a day, which is like 10 to 15% of a poor person's income. And of course, it's a dirty source of energy. It's smoky and bad for the lungs, and it's terrible for the environment. But it's really the main option. So Sam Goldman, 20-something, he's looking around trying to see, is there any other option? Is there anybody selling some other kind of solar light, something distributed here in Benin, Africa? And there wasn't. So when he came back to the States, he enrolled in a business program at Stanford, and he took a class on designability, sustainability, and affordability in design. And he met another guy in the class named Ted Nosen, who'd been like working in Nairobi, documenting AIDS victims and telling their stories. And together, the two men decided that they would develop some kind of a solar lantern. And they had a dream that they would bring light to 1 billion people. They figured, why not? It's been 130 years, right, since Thomas Edison developed the light bulb, and there's still 2 billion people with no electricity. And nobody's solving it. Traditional charity isn't solving it, and the free market capital isn't solving it. Let's solve it. So they jumped in there, and tried to develop this prototype. And from the very beginning, they had all kinds of challenges. For one, here are these two white guys, and they had to totally redesign the idea of what success meant. They had to decide that success wasn't money, power, fame, but success was releasing the most human energy into the world, releasing the most good into the world. Right from the very start, they had to decide that it would be okay if they weren't successful like the other people at Stanford Business School, right? That they couldn't afford, they didn't have the same things. And they had to decide that they were going to have to listen really closely to hear the poor, not as people we're solving problems, but as customers, as people who have ideas and energy and passion. And the problem was so huge because kerosene is a $10 billion industry. And governments and mafias and predatory lenders and village chiefs, they have got their hand in the pocket. They have no desire for it to go away. And if you're a poor person, 40 cents a day, how do you come up with 30 bucks? Even if the lantern will pay for itself in 3 months, and you'll never have that expense. But there's the issue of, we've been using this kerosene lantern for 150 years. And what if what if it doesn't work? What if it breaks? What will I do then? And all along, they face this issue of listening and being open and not being the ones with the answers. Jacqueline Novogratz tells about a day after they developed this kind of initial lantern, and they went to a woman who had risked buying it in Kenya. She was a tiny little woman, little grandmother, and she was sitting there with her 1-year-old on her lap. And this, as she describes, big burly Australian guy with a shock of white hair, who's kind of used to being in charge, comes in there. They want to hear, how does she like the lantern? And she talks about how it's changed her life. How she can see at night, how she's not afraid. And Jacqueline says it's this kind of, dance she's seen back and forth all of her life, where the poor person is like so thankful to the person who's brought. And then they said, do you have any ways we could improve it? And she said, well, if it had a string on it, then I could tie it from the roof and it could light the whole place. And I said, well, that's a really good idea. And then she went on, and there's got to be a way that you could build a little pocket on the back. And just like you're, replenishing the solar, you could replenish these batteries. And then we could listen to the radio and hear the presidential. And then that's a really, and then she just kept on and on and on. And Jacqueline said it was a different kind of conversation, right? Where both people were able to listen and learn and grow. For a long time, they had no idea whether Sam and Ned could make that company work. But last year, they were able to announce that they have brought light to 100 million people. That's moving the needle, folks. That's changing the world, because people were able to take something like a solar lantern and dig in and decide we don't have to have a big profit tomorrow. We can have a big mission like lighting the world. And it's true for all of us in our small individual ways when we'll risk drawing near to one another and listening to one another. Last night, my son, 22, in his very first job after college, gave me a call. He'd been at work 10, 12 hours. He directs his sailing program, leading kids, teaching lessons, administering staff. And he had a challenge. It was a new challenge. It was kind of a big challenge, kind of a stressful, difficult situation, something that I've faced a lot and he'll face many times. And I tried to do something that's a new thing for me. I tried not to give advice. I tried not to catastrophize and worry about it and tell him what to do. I tried to listen and encourage. I tried to say, God, sounds like you handle it really well, that it'll be okay. This went on for maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes, mainly Ben talking. And then he had to go back to work. And before he got off the phone, he said, thank you for listening to me. Every single day, we had the chance to draw close to ourselves, right? To see the things we do, the ways we normally pattern and move about and control, and to decide what's the really life-giving way I want to be. What's the dream that I want to drive me? Not controlling and dominating and being at the top, but living in a world where all of God's people can be heard, can be served, can be fed, can grow together. May the gift of this crazy time in our lives, maybe the gift of all the young people who are going before us, lighting the way, inviting us to risk being new people. May that encourage each of us to reach deep, to move past the patterns we've had that no longer serve us, and move into the new future. Amen.